The storms left 3 million people in the dark this morning. They had no electricity. In many homes, it was a cold breakfast by candlelight. Trains into London were disrupted. Most had to be cancelled. On the roads, traffic lights weren't working, adding to the chaos. 1 million people are still without electricity tonight, and it'll be several days before full power is restored. The wind blew down power lines and forced power stations to shut to prevent an overloading of the national grid.
For staff at the CEGB's National Control Centre in London, it was a crisis the like of which they'd never faced before. At 4 a.m. they got their first inkling of trouble. Their grid began showing disruptions to power supplies along the south coast. Within minutes, Dungeness power station was completely out of action, along with the cross-channel electricity link from France. Power stations and lines began going down like ninepins. The CEGB say they had no option but to cut off supplies to stop the trouble spreading further north, causing long-term damage to the national grid. By 4:30, they could meet only 10% of the southeast demand.
It is a day that we train ourselves to try and cope with. I believe the people involved have behaved admirably in trying to restore supplies, and it could have been very, very much worse if it hadn't been prompt action of the control engineers who are actually controlling the minute-to-minute operation.
By the time the Energy Secretary arrived at 9 o'clock to see how staff were coping, along with Board Chairman Lord Marshall, most power stations were back on stream, but the emergency was far from over. The problem now is not with the CEGB, it's with the individual area electricity boards who have the responsibility of getting power to the customer. Given the widespread damage to power lines, some are predicting that particularly in rural areas, restoring supplies to every home could be a matter of days rather than hours. The damaged cables are causing concern for other reasons too.
I would urge the public that if they see a cable or any kind of wire on the ground, do not go near it. Don't touch it, don't go near it. It's possible it could be live, and if they touch it, it'll kill them.
The CEGB are angry they had no prior warning from the weather centre, nor did the emergency services. By 7 o'clock, every single ambulance in London was on the road. Scotland Yard was similarly inundated with 999 calls. This was just one of the 6,000 emergencies the London Fire Brigade had to deal with, more than ever before in their history. They say the first official warning they received of trouble ahead was at 3 a.m. That warning, with terrible understatement, forecast strong winds blowing at anything over 20 miles an hour.
Well, the weather forecasters admit that they got it wrong. They knew a depression was on its way, but they were given no clue as to just how ferocious it would turn out to be. The weather forecast in this morning's Times was typical of what the professional Met men believed. It just predicted an unsettled autumnal look to today's weather. So how was it that they were so wrong?
It took the country by surprise. The question is why? As late as last night, the weather forecast gave little hint of the havoc to come.
Well, that's what the situation was like earlier on this evening. It's associated with this quite deep low pressure area, and a few days ago we thought it would be coming a little bit further west, bringing the strong winds right across the country, but now it looks as though most of those strong winds will stay away, although it's still going to be very breezy up through the Channel and on the eastern side of the country.
At the headquarters of the Met Office at Bracknell in Berkshire, weathermen had seen something was brewing as long ago as last Sunday, but they didn't know exactly what. By noon on Wednesday, the depression in mid-Atlantic seemed innocuous enough. By 6 p.m. it had moved east, warm air from the tropics being forced upwards by cold air from the north, creating a big depression. By 6 o'clock yesterday morning, two centres developed as the depression entered the Bay of Biscay. By noon yesterday, the two centres began to merge, making it more intense. By 6 o'clock last night, the storm had gathered strength. It was now a whirlpool of turbulence. By midnight, the storm centre was west of the Channel Islands. The depression suddenly deepened, whipping up the hurricane-force winds. At the London Weather Centre, a peak gust of 94 miles an hour was recorded on the roof. The wind gauge on the British Telecom Tower measured a gust of 107 miles an hour. Then it broke. The readings just stopped. In a true hurricane, the average wind speed is about 75 miles an hour. Last night's storm wasn't a hurricane, But with gusts over 100 miles an hour, the wind speeds were bordering on hurricane strength. Yesterday, the weathermen were wrong in forecasting which direction the storm would take.
We knew about gales and severe gales getting into Essex and Kent. We knew this was coming, but instead of just Essex and Kent, it meant the whole of southern England.
Experts today defended the Met Office. They said it wasn't really their fault. They didn't see what was coming. This type of depression is notoriously difficult to forecast accurately. It's the way the depression suddenly deepened which caused the trouble. Forecasts depend on weather reports from ships, aeroplanes and weather balloons, released from what's known as upper air stations. Britain has only 8 of these stations, not sufficient to monitor accurately the early changes which would have given longer notice of the storm.
It'll take some time to work out the full cost of last night's havoc. The question is, who's going to foot the bill? Will the insurance companies pay for everything? And who can the local authorities turn to?
This is the scene that thousands of householders woke up to this morning. In Ealing, London's greenest borough, trees lining the streets had toppled in all directions, smashing roofs, chimneys and windows. Since the early hours, council workmen have been sawing people free, a job that'll eat up resources for a long time to come.
It's going to take weeks and weeks and weeks to recover from this. It's going to take an enormous amount of effort and an enormous amount of money, and I hope that we can look to the government to support us in this, because the burden on local ratepayers is going to be enormous.
So far, the government hasn't committed itself on that. But for victims of the storm, the immediate worry is who pays for their damage. At the offices of insurance loss adjusters, the calls have been streaming in. People are asking first if their policies protect them from an act of God like the gales, and then can they go ahead with repairs before the damage is inspected.
They're certainly covered. It is an act of God, but it's one of those acts of God that are covered under the insurance policy. What they should do is to take precautions and do what they can initially to minimize their own loss. If they can get hold of a builder, all well and good. Builders are going to be very busy in the next week or so they should do what they can to protect the roof, sheet it, put polythene bags in the loft, obviously take down anything that's dangerous and hanging. The insurers will stick by them, and they're happy for them to do that. They would far rather they took what precautions they can initially than leave it to become worse.
Hello? The sheer number of claims means last night's storms will cost insurers dearly. Spring gales 2 years ago brought claims totalling £55 million. So will premiums shoot up next year?
Unlikely. It's not like motor insurance or that type of thing where premiums immediately go up or no claim bonuses are taken away.
As for claims on crushed or battered cars, you are insured as long as your policy is fully comprehensive.
A special meeting of ministers was called at the Cabinet Office in Whitehall this afternoon to discuss the storms. The Home Secretary Douglas Hurd chaired the meeting, which examined how the emergency services dealt with last night's events and discussed how best to ease the problems the storms have left behind.
In Whitehall, several trees had been uprooted, producing a scene reminiscent of the Blitz. When ministers arrived for the emergency meeting at the Cabinet Office, they cheerfully avoided the fallen branches.
Trees blocking the way.
But there was no doubting the seriousness of the mood when ministers left at the end of the hour-long meeting.
Winds of 100 miles an hour by any standards, which is what they were on the coast, and 94 in the city, represent a severe form of hurricane.
After Mr. Parkinson left, neatly climbing over a fallen branch, there was a news conference at the Home Office.
Well, I've just come from chairing a meeting of ministers in the various departments responsible for handling the aftermath of what has been the worst and most widespread night of disaster in the southeast of England since the war.
Mr. Hurd said that all the public authorities involved had coped resiliently. He wouldn't respond to criticism of the Met Office for not forecasting the strength of the storm. The Home Secretary had been in touch with the Prime Minister in Vancouver, and she had sent her sympathy to relatives of the victims.